It was a mistake, but I think I want to do it again. This is my story about the first time I met an escort, the first time I indulged a long-held fantasy of mine, and the first time I cheated on someone. This is making me horny just writing about it, but it's also good to get it off my chest, and also seek anyone's opinion on whether or not I should fulfill some more of my fantasies in the same way. Now, I know I shouldn't for various and obvious different reasons. However, I 100% know for sure that I wouldn't be able to fulfill my fantasies elsewhere, so realistically it is more about whether I should indulge my carnal desires or keep them at bay. Not so long ago I was supposed to be at work doing my normal day, and as far as everyone else knew outside of work, that was what I was doing, except I had booked a day off from work just to be away from everything. I had no real plans for the day other than to go for a random drive as I often would and see where I would end up. I can't remember how far along the journey the thought crossed my mind, but I realized that no one knew where I was and I was starting to have other thoughts, dirty thoughts in turn making me horny. For a while, I tried to suppress those thoughts and carry on driving, but as I carried on driving I found myself heading to a city, shall not be named, and parking up. By this time my thoughts were getting more intense and I couldn't resist much longer, so I relented and searched online for escorts available near me. Now I knew that this was a terrible idea on many levels, but my urges/fantasies at that point were too strong to ignore. After a little while I found someone who was available near me and would indulge a fantasy of mine, and my adrenaline was pumping whilst I was asking myself, shan't I message the girl I found? Eventually I decided I would, and considering previous messages to other girls went largely unanswered, I figured. A part of me also hoped that it would be the same scenario here, but alas it wasn't, and she responded within minutes stating she could see me in an hour and that she would fulfill a long-held fantasy of mine. At this point my adrenaline skyrocketed, and whilst I knew I should have left it at that, I decided to continue messaging her to arrange to meet. After a series of messages I soon found myself walking into the city center looking for the nearest cash point to draw out some money to meet her. Again, adrenaline and nerves were sky high, but I couldn't stop thinking about her body from the pictures and what she would do to me. After a lengthy walk I found myself outside her apartment. It was a nice, modern, and discreet place overlooking the docks. It took me a while to find as there was building work going on which obscured the entrance to the building, but I eventually found it. Once there I was instructed to use the intercom system and she would let me in, but it didn't seem to be working. I tried to contact her, but I believe she was getting ready so didn't respond. Looking back now, I reckon I should have taken this as a sign to not go through with it, but instead I kept trying, and eventually someone else came through a side door in the building and opened the door for me. From there, it was a short walk to the lift and a few floors up and down the corridor. When I arrived at her door, I was asked to not knock on the door, which of course I obliged, and instead sent her a text. As soon as I sent the text, I knew there was no real going back. This was it. I am going to fulfill a fantasy of mine, but also cheat whilst doing so, but I was also thinking about what I would see when she opened the door. After a short while the door opened up and she greeted me completely nude apart from a thin red nightie and some red lipstick. Not what I had requested, as I didn't want the chance of lipstick marks, but I thought, what the hell. I must confess, however, she didn't look quite like her pics. Not ugly or anything like that, but just not quite what I had imagined. Upon entering, I asked how this works, having not visited an escort before. I wasn't sure if I was to pay before or after, etc., to which she said to pay now, and we can then get down to business, sort of speak. After the paperwork was dealt with, I was shown to the bedroom where she invited me to make myself comfortable, and she would be back shortly. Before she left the room, though, we engaged in a hug which soon turned to a sloppy French kiss. This now was the point of no return, and it turned me on so much. After she left the room, I started to undress and make myself comfortable. I remember saying to myself, "What are you doing?" and "I can't believe I'm doing this," etc., but none of my thoughts would stop me going through with it. After a short while, she re-entered the room fully naked and pulled out a condom from the drawer ready to put on me. Unfortunately, I'm pretty sure I have some form of ED, so it did make putting it on more difficult, but we got there in the end. She soon started sucking and caressing my C, occasionally going a little further down with her tongue, which felt great, before going back to my C. As I said, however, I reckon ED, and perhaps some guilt, prevented me from getting fully erect, even though my adrenaline was sky high and was enjoying it overall. After a while, we decided she would try sex with her on top, but again I had issues keeping it up. Thankfully, however, this wasn't my main aim for the visit, so I wasn't overly disappointed by it. After a while, she realized I was having a little trouble, so she invited me to stand at the foot of the bed, whilst she knelt in front of me, and instructed me to aim below her neck, which thankfully I did manage to come all over her chest. Once that was done, we had a bit more passionate kissing before she said it was time to indulge my fantasy that I was longing for. Once we parted our lips and our bodies, she ushered me into the bathroom, whereby she instructed me to lie down in the bath facing up, and at this point I knew what was coming and the adrenaline shot right back up. Shortly after, she mounted the sides of the bathtub, spreading her legs and pussy over me and started to pee on me. I must admit it was quite strong smelling, so she must have been dehydrated, but nonetheless it was very enjoyable. At first she couldn't get much to come out, so she said wait there, and she would be back. When she came back, she had a pint glass of water she was drinking. I knew that it wouldn't go through her that quickly, but it might spur her body on to pee more. When she mounted the bathtub again, she started to pee again, and thankfully it was a much better stream. I wasn't sure whether to let her piss on my face / in my mouth, or not, just because of the cleanup afterwards, so I decided to let just relieve herself on my body. After she had finished, I was left to shower, etc., and after that I rejoined her in the bedroom, where we talked for a little while, and then it was soon time to leave. As I was leaving, we engaged in another hug. I politely declined a kiss, sadly, purely because I had wiped off all lipstick and didn't want any to come back on me. After I left, I soon started to experience guilt / regret, etc., which I was feeling all the way home. As I was home alone when I got back, I knew I would need to freshen up more, as she had quite strong perfume on and I could smell it all over me, so I decided to hop in the shower. It's worth mentioning that my adrenaline was still sky high, and so I jerked off whilst I was in the shower and released one of the biggest loads I have ever done. For some time afterwards, I regretted the whole thing and still do in many ways. However, the naughty side of it has started to creep back in lately, and I have started to think about other fantasies I would like to try, one of which being snowballing. I also often jerk off thinking about the encounter, even though it wasn't the most successful. Question now, though, is do I do it again to fulfill another fantasy? Take away all of the morals and the fact that it's wrong and dangerous, etc. Do I want to, or should I experience that adrenaline / thrill again?